Perhaps one of the biggest stories this year to be overshadowed by a crazy news cycle. You got the Alec Baldwin dismissal of his case from the Rust incident. The big question is, though, was there actual justice that was performed here? Let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel today. That's right, we're going to take a step back because so many things can happen in such a short period of time. We had Matt Cabero on the channel last week, and after we ended up shooting that video, we were talking about the Alec Baldwin case and how it's kind of been overlooked in the news cycle. So to walk us through it here today, we have brought Matt back to talk a little bit about the dismissal of Alec Baldwin's case. Matt, thank you very much for coming back with us today.
Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. And guys, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. It really helps with the algorithm. We're trying to grow this channel as much as we can so that people can be educated on 2A litigation and legislation as they go to the ballot box this November. So let's just jump right in here, Matt. I'm just let's start this off from a nice foundation. CRPA, the lawsuits that we file, they are civil lawsuits. This was a criminal case. So I'm just sort of curious, the way that the attorneys have to conduct themselves. Are there any differences that you'll see in a civil case versus a criminal case?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first and foremost is obviously the standard of proof in order to get a judgment. And so in a criminal case, you're talking about a conviction, generally speaking, where someone's going to be, usually as a result of a conviction, incarcerated or face heavy fines, that kind of thing that's payable to the state. And so in a criminal case, what we typically have is a standard that most people are familiar with. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's free from all doubt, just free from unreasonable doubt. And so in the sense that as far as standards are concerned, in order to get a conviction, it's a very, very, very high bar in order to meet that. And the prosecutor typically has the burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that someone is guilty of the alleged offense. And they will typically, in most cases, have to convince 12 strangers, jurors that, are typically licensed drivers or people that are registered to vote in the county that were unable to get out of jury duty that day, so to speak. And so they have to convince those 12 strangers that that person committed the alleged offense beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, in a civil case, you're talking about typically monetary damages for a plaintiff, and the burden is often significantly less, either by a clear convincing standard or preponderance of the evidence. And so basically more likely than not in some cases, or there's, say like 75% sure that the person is guilty of the wrongful conduct that should therefore redress the injured party as a result of that. And so in this case, in the Alec Baldwin case, we're talking about the former, which is the criminal context. And so it's a much, much higher burden than a civil case.
But as far as the guilt is concerned, for this specific case, we didn't even get there, right? I mean, this came down to being dismissed because a prosecutor mishandled evidence. And I guess what that comes down to is courtroom ethics. Can you go into courtroom ethics for us for a little bit? I don't know if there's a difference between a civil versus a criminal case, because ethics are ethics. But can you break down for us what those ethics look like and how they were violated here?
Yeah, so we have a lot of constitutional protections for criminal cases that are brought against an individual, because what you're effectively talking about is taking away effectively that person's freedom. And so at the end of the day, they'll be incarcerated against their will, kind of thing. And so what we have in a criminal context, usually, for example, there's many things to talk about, but you have a right to be tried by a jury of your peers. You have a right to counsel. And more importantly, as far as I think what is at issue here is that you have a right to be presented with the evidence that will be presented against you by the prosecutor. And so typically in a criminal case in California, by way of example, all of that evidence is provided to the defense basically at the onset of the case, at the start of the case. And so that would allow, for example, then the defense team, whether it be an individual attorney or, in the case of some instances like Alec Baldwin, for example, multiple attorneys that are working for him to try and wade through whatever evidence the prosecution has to poke enough holes, so to speak, in that evidence to create the reasonable doubt that would be necessary for an acquittal. And so, generally speaking, in these cases, you have that right to be presented with everything as a criminal defendant that the prosecutor will be bringing against you. They can't, hide the ball, so to speak, and last minute introduce something without giving you an opportunity to review it and present an adequate defense against it.
Well, and then to add on to that, this case was dismissed with prejudice. Can you tell us exactly what that means and why it might be important to Alec Baldwin?
Yeah, so there's typically two ways cases get dismissed, either with or without prejudice. And basically what that means is that in the criminal context, if a case is dismissed with prejudice, it can never be brought again. And so we often talk about double jeopardy, where someone cannot be charged with the same offense twice, for example, after being acquitted. And so that's kind of essentially what's happening here, in the sense that the judge has said, look, based off of this mistake that the prosecution made, I'm going to be dismissing the case with prejudice. And so the prosecution, therefore, is barred from refiling this case with these allegations. If there was going to be some other criminal case that gets filed against Alec Baldwin, it would have to be a completely different, basically, fact pattern or allegation, a different type of offense that's not related in any way to the charges that were brought against him in this case.
Well, I guess the only question that really remains, and we can draw this out a little bit, but the only question that really remains is, has justice happened here? You kind of have this feeling it's a high profile case going into this, not just a movie star, but a movie star who is pretty outspoken about his political beliefs, which has charged a lot of people into the basic assumption that we should be accountable for our actions. I understand that you have a courtroom rule that has been broken, but Jacob, if you can, roll this clip really quick, because I think there is an important distinction that we need to make.
Just remember, there are the SAG guidelines, there's bulletins, safety bulletins that dictate, even if you're an actor, even if you're on a movie set, you treat a real firearm as though it's always loaded, never point it at another person, and don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Those are cardinal firearm handling safety rules. So yes, did I believe that there was some inappropriate behavior with regard to handling this gun? I do. It's unfortunate that things went the way they went, but the fact of the matter is that we as prosecutors have very, very serious and high ethical obligations, that when something comes to our attention, evidence comes to us, or we become aware of evidence, you turn it over.
So again, you have this issue of a courtroom rule being broken, but the dismissal of the case kind of takes away from the reason that you were there in the first place, which is to determine whether or not Alec Baldwin was guilty of a crime. So I guess this is a little bit more of an opinionated question, but is this an injustice within our judicial system?
It's a very good question. And so in a lot of the criminal cases that we've done, and at least in California, and it's true generally in most states, and I'd imagine it's no different in this state, we have this legal doctrine. It's called harmless error. And so what that effectively is that, let's say that there's a mistake, like the prosecutor forgets to provide some evidence, like as was the case here, to the defense team. If it can be shown that regardless of that evidence being provided, it wouldn't have changed the outcome as far as the jury, for example, reaching a guilty verdict, and it's not something that would be unfairly prejudicial to the defense team for the fact that it wasn't provided, even though it might have been a mistake. That's something that the courts can and often do rely on in still reaching a conclusion at the end of the day that the person is guilty of the alleged offense that they've been charged with, even after the fact. And so I think it's kind of telling here in this case that what I've seen a lot of course, we've all seen the media reporting on the dismissal of the case, but we don't really see that sort of analysis being provided. Like, well, okay, so the judge determined that this evidence wasn't provided to the defense team, and therefore she's dismissing the case with prejudice. it's like, well, what's the significance of the evidence that's being, withheld, kind of thing, or was improperly withheld to the defense counsel? And is that, clearly so unfairly prejudicial for that to have been withheld that it should result in basically a mistrial, which is what this is. But more importantly, you go into this even further. It's like, okay, let's assume this happens like it did here. More often than not, what usually happens is the judge will say, that instead of dismissing the case with prejudice, they'll dismiss it without prejudice, to basically give the prosecution an opportunity to refile and sort of fix the error, in that sense. And so there's also no analysis or any sort of discussion that I've seen from the media on this issue. It's like, why couldn't the judge have just done that in this case? It's like you want to talk about how, we're held to this standard as gun owners, generally speaking, that, we have to deal with laws that basically require an attorney on retainer just to understand so you don't get into trouble. And here you have an example of someone that, as far as an opinion is concerned, appears to have been at least criminally negligent in discharging a firearm and resulting in the death of and injury of another person. That should be something that you should hold that person accountable for. And if there's any sort of argument to be made here that the evidence that was withheld, that you can just fix it by redoing the case over again, why didn't that happen here? And that's, I think, an important question that the media isn't doing a very good job of answering.
Yeah, perhaps something that the media is doing a good job of displaying is that the firearms community just wants lawlessness as far as firearms are concerned, which couldn't be farther from the truth. As an organization advocating for being tough on crimes involving firearms, I can tell you that most of these groups out here are constantly advocating for not just safety, but also for these crimes to have heavy sentencing so that people are deterred from doing the wrong thing. So in that case, Matt, I guess final thoughts here. Are you saying that there is, even though the case was dismissed with prejudice, there is an opportunity for further analysis after the fact? And as far as the firearms community is concerned, just a continuance upon the road of promoting firearm safety?
Yeah, so it's always possible that the prosecutor could appeal to a higher court the lower court's order here dismissing the case with prejudice. For example, if the judge exceeded their discretion in any way and the higher court, for whatever reason, says that decision to do that was improper, it's always possible that we could see this, go back to square one, so to speak. But I think the other thing that's important to realize here is that if for those of you that may recall the O.J. Simpson cases way back when, of course, O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. He was acquitted on a criminal context, but a lot of people don't realize or might not understand or forget that he was actually found liable in a civil context. And so as far as justice is concerned, there's two ways of looking at it. Yes, we have the criminal side of it where the prosecutor is basically seeking incarceration or, heavy fines, that kind of thing. But then you also have the civil side where the people that were actually injured as a result of the conduct here still have an opportunity to present a case in a civil claim to, for example, redress the potential injury here. Now, obviously, we're talking about negligent death or homicide, so to speak, where someone was actually killed as a result of that. So their estate, for example, could potentially pursue a civil claim against Alec Baldwin in that case, and potentially force him to pay or maybe even settle, depending on where that goes. And so we'll see what happens with that. But those are the two ways that you can basically see this playing out in the future, at least in some way.
Well, something certainly to follow along with, and follow along we will. Matt, I want to thank you. I know that you're a busy guy. Thank you very much for coming on and spending the time sharing your thoughts on this with us.
Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely. And guys, if you like videos like this, you want to keep seeing the content, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to these videos. That like button's getting a lot of attention from the algorithm these days, so if you could smash it for me, it'd really do a lot of good in helping us get this video out to as many people as possible. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.